Welcome to today's podcast interview. I brought on Jeff Patterson. Jeff, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Please give listeners a little background. Where do you live and what do you do?
I live in Portland, Oregon, and I have been running an martial arts and meditation academy here in Portland now for 30 years. It's been my life work. I've been studying the meditative arts now for 36 years, and I've been very fortunate to have over 26,000 students come through the academy. And through the years and seeing all of these people, I've heard hundreds of stories of how the meditative arts has positively influenced people's lives in numerous different ways. And that's really what's driven my passion to write my last couple books and create my online program, my teacher training program, and really fuel my desire to get this message out there and help as many people as I can with it.
Well, that's what I'm excited to talk about today. Meditation has become so much more mainstream. I think it's no longer thought of as woo-woo or spiritual. I remember when I started years ago, it was very difficult for me to sit still and observe my thoughts. That's when like my mind went crazy. But now I'm at a point I literally crave it. And for me, practicing meditation morning and evening, creating that space of stillness has created a lot of presence, emotional intelligence, and just like I feel more in control of my life rather than being controlled by the environment and external influences. So we're just going to deep dive. Can you kind of explain at a high level what meditation is and the different styles?
There's many different methods of meditation, and so I kind of break it down more so into categories of practice. And what I mean by that is I break it down into five pillars. We have kind of the athletic side or the performance side of the practice that helps improve your timing and your presence, your awareness, and helps with performance if you're an athlete or a performer or even in business. And then we have the therapeutic side of the practice, which is great for strength and stability and flexibility and helping work through injuries. Then there's the medical side of the practice where all of Chinese medicine is based off of Qigong theory. So this is a very deep pillar. And then there's the philosophical branch. And then lastly, more of the spiritual side of the practice, which is what most people think of when they refer to meditation. And so, from these five areas, when a new student comes to the practice, we try to narrow down one or two of these directions so we can really pick and choose the right practices for you because we want to build an evolving life practice with the meditative arts that fits your lifestyle and really helps you kind of get what you need out of the practice.
Now, I would love for you to share the different, I guess, styles or formats because I think a lot of people it's a misnomer to think you have to sit still in this weird pose like this when I mean, walking in nature is a meditative practice. For me, sometimes running is a meditative practice. So, can you please share the different style formats?
So yeah, there's many. So doing different sitting practices is one method, and that's usually what most people think of when they think of meditation. And when you're sitting, there's many different things that you can do through breath work and energetic circulations in the body and different philosophical approaches that we can add into the practice. Then we have standing meditation, walking meditation, meditation through like Tai Chi forms or yoga practices or Qigong sets that we can do. So there really is a number of different ways. And, one of the most common things I hear people say when we start talking about meditation is, I tried meditation, but it just didn't work for me. I couldn't quiet my mind. And, somewhere along the way, people got this misconception that in order to be successful with meditation, you have to quiet your mind and reach this place of nirvana where nothing bothers you. And, I've been studying the meditative arts for 36 years. I've traveled around the world and trained with teachers from all over the planet. And I have never once met anybody who doesn't get distracted. And so you need to change that mindset. And when you do, now you can realize that, hey, this is something positive. And when I get distracted, that's not a bad thing. If you're sitting for 20 minutes or doing a movement meditation for 20 minutes and you get distracted 50 times, every time you get distracted, you recognize that imbalance and you use your posture, your breath, your movement, or whatever it is you're doing to bring yourself back to focus. And now you just got 50 repetitions of being out of balance and bringing yourself back to center. And if you do this every day, every month, every year, you start developing this power, this ability to just be unshakable. So if something happens at work or somebody says something to throw you off your game, you have the tools and the ability to approach it from a balanced mindset and really be more stable and rooted in your daily life.
I think what you were just sharing there about like 50 times getting off track and distracted, I think isn't it just even catching yourself and getting back on is a win. That's a
Yeah,
win.
for sure. And the
Show,
ability, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and showing up for yourself, and for some people, if 5 minutes is difficult, well, sit for 5 minutes, but celebrate that. Because I remember for me, sitting still for like 5 minutes was awful. And now I've done as long as a 4 hour one, which felt like 3 minutes. And so, it's like building that mindset muscle. It's practice and keep going. And some days I might only have 15 minutes, and other days I want to sit for an hour. So it's understanding the ebb and flows of life, right?
Yeah, and you really can integrate it into everything you do. I break down kind of the meditative practices into three pillars. So we have ritual practices, active practices, and philosophical practices. And the ritual practice is kind of what you're talking about there, where you set time aside every day and maybe it's 20 minutes, maybe it's an hour, whatever that is for you. And that's really kind of the core of any meditation practice. But then we have these active practices that we can integrate in throughout the day, and they can be done when you're walking down the street or standing in line at the grocery store. And the more that we can incorporate these and start making the meditation and that kind of mindset training a way of life and less of a hobby, that's where we really start reaping all the benefits of the practice. And then the third pillar is the philosophical side of the practice. And that can be used in both ritual and active practices.
How about now, can we talk about kind of like the mass majority of where people are at today? And let's talk about the benefits of implementing a meditative practice, like kind of that before and after what's possible.
There's so many benefits from integrating meditation. I mentioned, I've had a lot of students come through the academy and I've heard endless stories. I've seen people coming in with physical ailments to sicknesses to dealing with stress disorders, anxiety, panic attacks. I've seen athletes come in and use it for improving their performance. I mean, there's so many different directions. And in any kind of a meditation practice, and anything that we've mentioned so far, whether it's a sitting practice, breath work, or a movement practice, we have what I call the five pillars or the five regulations, which are key to developing and cultivating any kind of meditation practice. And they are regulating the body, regulating the breath, regulating the mind, regulating the energy, and regulating the spirit. And briefly, I'll kind of touch on what those are. So, regulating the body is usually where we begin. It's the easiest one to regulate. And the idea is paying attention to your skeletal alignment, your muscular tension in the body. And an example of this would be think about a time where you're sitting down at your computer and you've been there for 3 or 4 hours. Maybe your shoulders are rounded forward and you're feeling lethargic and depleted, and maybe your neck's getting sore. And then another time when the most important person in your world walks in the room and your body perks up and you feel like you're on top of the world. Well, these two different energetic states, we are in 100% control of all day, every day. And learning how to regulate the body and control this can play a huge role in how we energetically appear physically, mentally, and emotionally. And knowing that, I always ask people to think about, on an average day, how much of the day are you feeling and letting yourself be depleted? Because that's your choice. And so First thing, I think usually within 2 to 3 months of active work on this, we can make some huge shifts just with dealing with this one regulation. Then we have regulating the breath, which is a lifelong practice. And in Qigong, they often refer to the practice of Qigong as the science of the breath because there's literally hundreds of different breathing strategies that you can learn while doing a Qigong practice. And because of that, we broadly categorize them into yin methods and yang methods. The yin methods are often deeper, more holistic style of meditations that help us bring the energy inward. And an example of the yin breath would be if you ever listen to somebody sleep, their natural breathing pattern is a longer inhale and a shorter exhale. And this is the body's natural way of bringing your conscious mind into your subconscious mind, which is where we are when we're sleeping and dreaming. And so, if we want to emulate this style of energy in our meditations, we can do longer inhales, maybe soft retentions at the end of the inhale, and shorter exhales to help bring that energy inward, which is great for stress reduction, dealing with anxiety and panic attacks. It's great for boosting your creativity. And there's a lot of reasons why we would do this style of breathing. Then we have the yang side of the breath, which is more aggressive. It's kind of like if you ever had to push your car, you pick up something heavy, your natural instinct is use the exhale, put tension in the breath, maybe even make it audible. And this helps generate energy and power. Now, once we understand how to use the breath as a strategy, and in Chinese philosophy, they call this balancing the Kan and Li, we can adjust our physical, mental, and emotional outcomes. Most people go through the day with emotional ups and downs. Some people are like a roller coaster, others may be a little more balanced. But when we start seeing these imbalances and we're starting to get excited, we can use the yin side of the breath to help bring it back down. And when we see ourselves starting to feel depleted, we can use the yang side of the breath to help pick us back up. And now we can use this tool to help us maintain more stability and balance throughout the day. The third regulation is regulating the mind. And regulating the mind is an extremely deep practice. It's something that you will be spending the rest of your life working on. We kind of touched on it a little bit with getting distracted and learning how to bring yourself back to center. There's this story that I really enjoy about these two old monks, and they're walking down the road after a huge rainstorm. It's muddy everywhere, and they come up to this big mud puddle. And on the other side of the puddle is this little girl standing there in a white dress, and she's crying. And the older monk, he yells across the puddle and says, "Is everything okay? Can we help you?" And she says, "I need to be somewhere, but if I walk across this puddle, I'm going to get my dress all dirty." So the older of the two monks, he rolls up his pant legs and he walks across the puddle and picks her up, puts her on his back, takes her to the other side, and she's off on her way. Well, him and the younger monk are walking down the road for a couple miles, and finally, the younger monk is just furious and he says, "You know we're not supposed to touch girls, but yet you did back there at the puddle." And the older monk looks down at him and says, "You're still thinking about that girl? I left her back there at the puddle." And it's a simple story, but how many times in life do we get 2 miles down the muddy road before we realize that we got to let that go? We've got to kind of find that imbalance and recognize it and make that change before we get too far down that negative path. And so, learning how to regulate the mind is a really important foundational principle in the meditative arts. The fourth regulation is regulating the energy. And regulating the energy is an extremely deep topic and something that we could talk about for hours. But just briefly, I'll kind of describe what I mean when I say that, in that if you have reached a competent level in regulating the body, the breath, and the mind, you have the tools and the ability to regulate and circulate the energy in the body for different outcomes. And we'll do this with different meditation practices and different advanced energetic work. And then the last regulation is regulating the spirit, which is a very profound idea. And it's something that meditation masters and Qigong masters will spend their entire life working towards that stage of enlightenment. Now, these five core fundamental regulations are the basics of any meditation practice, but you can see by breaking it down like this how effective and how many different ways it can influence your life and really help us with almost anything that we do.
There's one specifically I would like to deep dive more, and I've written some notes here, but obviously on the podcast, Mind Over Matter, I talk about mindset all of the time. So the idea of regulating the mind. Something we talked about in the pre-call that I want to um, discuss further. So much of this is awareness, right? Like getting out of being unconscious or living in autopilot and becoming more conscious of your day to day. So I'd love to talk more about like consciousness versus unconscious, and then let's get into the subconscious mind.
Okay. And do you have a specific question on that
Well,
area or?
when we're talking about what you were just discussing, like the different five different areas that we can regulate, and mind specifically, I believe, and through my experience, most people are living unconsciously in autopilot, like that monk story, dwelling on the past, anxious about the future. We haven't created presence. And obviously, meditation is a great practice to create more presence, to help us become more conscious. So, on that note, can you just discuss the power of becoming more conscious and aware and regulating our mind and our breath and our energy versus unconscious living?
Yes, I think a big part of what happens is like you were saying, most people are just unaware. They'll have something happen and they get into these routines. Most people, I've heard many different numbers thrown out here, but most people have anywhere from 70 to 90,000 thoughts a day, and 85% of those thoughts are the same thoughts that we had for the last 10 years, right? And so we're doing this over and over and over again. And I also read that 85 to 90% of our thoughts are negative. And so if we don't do anything to disrupt this and to increase our awareness and learn how to try to tend towards the positive, a lot of times we can waste a lot of our life going down that muddy road. And so the idea with meditation is that it improves our sensitivity and our awareness so we recognize the imbalance as soon as it happens rather than waiting 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour down the road, or sometimes 2 years down the road before we really recognize that and make the necessary changes to do that. And so I think a big part of it is developing the discipline, the integrity, the resilience, the perseverance to do this practice every day so we develop the habit and the ability to make that change and that be able to perceive those changes as they're happening so we don't get caught up on those negative paths.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I'm human. There are days when I don't get it done, or I'm traveling, or I didn't sleep well, whatever. But I have noticed it is a night and day difference when I spend the time in the morning, that intentional time and practice before I get on my phone, before I'm checking email. My day is extremely just way better versus autopilot, unconscious, just being reactive all day long. So I've just gotten to the point, yes, I still have off days, but I'm human and I give myself grace. But it's also kind of become a non-negotiable. Like I know how my day unfolds when I do it versus when I don't. And it's like, why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah. And that's a great realization because we want to stop looking at these practices as a chore that we have to do and
Right.
something that we get to do, something that we get excited about. Because when I've mentioned that I've had quite a few students through the years. And one of the things that I've noticed is that anytime somebody new comes in, I always tell them that, being part of this program, I want to see you doing at least a 20-minute a day ritual and integrating these active practices into your life. And of the students that listen to that and they do that every day for a year, I bet 97, 98% of them will do it for the rest of their life because they'll see so many benefits and they've shifted that mindset from, oh, this is something I have to do to this is something that makes everything better for me. I need to do this, and when they make that shift, that's where, all the true gold in the practice is at.
I couldn't agree more. And even on that note, I think anybody in personal development talks about a morning routine. And I literally had a guest one time, I'm not being sarcastic. He had a Excel spreadsheet, a 28-step morning routine, and I thought that was absurd. But to each their own, whatever works for you. But just like you said, I don't want a chore. I don't want another checklist. And that's why
Right.
I intentionally use the word ritual. I have a morning ritual and I use the acronym MIND, MIND, for four things: meditation and movement, setting an intention, expressing gratitude for a new day, and deciding who I'm showing up as. But something I wanted to note that has helped me, again, stimulus response, creating those habits. I created, and it's nothing fancy, but I created like a special sacred corner in my bedroom for meditation. I have a specific, I finally found a comfy chair. I tried a cushion. I tried sitting in bed, but I'd fall asleep. I tried many things, but I wanted back support. So I found this amazing chair. And so now it's this comfy, I'm excited to go to this space. So I think it's important to, or I'd love to hear your opinion on setting up if it's a corner of a room or your office or just somewhere you can get away so that it's like this sacred space.
I think it is really nice to have a place like that and putting things in that space that bring positive energy to you. Maybe it's a picture of your daughter or your grandmother or something that really means something to you. So when you go there, you have all of these good vibes coming around. I think that's very helpful. I also think though that as you start to develop this and becomes part of your lifestyle, that you can just as easily go to the park or go, for a walk in the woods or, sit down in a hotel room and easily get to that same place because it becomes part of who you are. For myself, I've been practicing for a long time. The last time I missed one of my morning rituals was when I had my hip surgery 5 years ago, and I don't plan on missing again for the next, as long as I can foresee, and not on top of that, but then you also have these practices that you're doing throughout the day. Maybe it's only 5 minutes here or 2 minutes here, or maybe it's a half an hour again later in the day, whatever that is. But eventually it just starts to get to the point where you're regulating without regulating. You don't even think about it, but it just starts to become the way you live. And that's where it really starts to reap a lot of benefits.
Something I'd like to touch on, just to hear more what you talk about in this sense, but the idea of the subconscious mind. So from my lens or angle, the importance of tapping into the subconscious, your operating system, through a meditation practice is because that's when we can get past the analytical mind into the subconscious. But I'd love to hear more about what do you talk about in your practices when with regards to a subconscious mind? What is it?
Yeah, so the subconscious mind is very important because it helps us get out of the distractions in our mind. And there's a practice that we do in Qigong called embryonic breathing that I really enjoy. And it's the core of, I feel like if you could really master the skill, there's not a meditation on the planet that you couldn't do. And it's a really amazing practice, but it teaches you how to bring that energy to the center line and be as close and connected to your subconscious mind as you possibly can be. And through this kind of power and this ability to keep maintain that focus, any energetic circulation you do in the body can be done. And so I think having some kind of practice in your meditation practice that you do every day to kind of help settle the monkey mind down and to get as close to the subconscious mind as you can is really valuable to integrate into your practice.
So that is a breath work I've never heard of, or maybe I've done it, but I didn't know the name. Is the embryonic breathing something that you could teach us on the podcast?
It's a pretty in-depth practice, so it would take more than what time we have left, I'm sure, because you said you wanted to keep this to 45 minutes. So but I do have that, on my online program. If you're interested in checking that out, at theyieldingwarrior.com, you could see some of the practices there and see some of the stuff that I have going on there.
Another one that's coming to mind, and there's so many different breathwork techniques, so I don't want anybody to get hung up on one. But I know, like in yoga, one of my yoga instructors, she always has us do box breathing in the beginning, and again, it's creating presence. Is there a simple breathing technique that you could offer and share today?
Well, there's many, and I think more important than the technique itself is understanding why are you doing this breathing strategy? What is it about the box breathing? What is it about the embryonic breathing? What is it about the yin side of the breath, the yang side of the breath? And what kind of actions or what kind of responses are come from this practice? Because when you understand the science behind it and why we're doing these different breathing strategies, then, if you're feeling anxiety, you could do this breathing strategy. If you're feeling depleted, you could do this breathing strategy. If you want to boost your creativity, you could do this. And so there's different ways to use the breath. And so I think there's anytime somebody new comes to the practice, there's a world of different things out there. You could go to YouTube and see a million videos. There's all these audio programs, there's apps everywhere. And one of the things that I see people getting distracted with is that they think that they can substitute their ritual time with their meditation by listening to an audio program or watching a video. And the meditative arts are often referred to as the internal arts, and they're referred to as the internal arts for a reason, in that that time is meant to look inward. It's not meant to be watching a video or listening to an audio. Now, those videos and audios are great to help you learn things. And if you don't have a teacher to work with, that's a great resource to help kind of build a toolbox, if you will. So in fact, I have a online program, so I use that as well. But I don't want the people that are in there to use that as a crutch. So when you're doing your ritual practice every day, you learn the practices, and then you turn yourself and your focus inward and use that time for yourself. And so I think that for somebody coming to the practice, finding a good guide is really important. I've literally seen people come into the academy that have been self-taught, that have been doing meditation for 15, 20 years, and they'll see one of the students here that's only been following a guide for a year, and their practice is a lot deeper than the person who's been doing it on their own for 15 years. And life is short, your time is valuable. It's easy to find somebody out there that can really help you and get you to the shortest path where you really start seeing benefit from the practice. So it's worth your time to find somebody to follow. And I think, without going into too much detail as far as like what are all these breathing strategies about, and you ask for a specific breathing practice, I think using just a simple thing that you could integrate maybe every hour or every 90 minutes where you just counted out 10 basic deep breaths is a way to help bring yourself back to present moment. That is something that you could see some change from in a fairly short amount of time.
Something that just popped into my mind. It's literally something I offer my coaching clients, what I call power of the pause. And it's 60 seconds. And so I think a lot of people might have a thought, I don't have enough time in the day to get through what I'm already doing. And I love the saying, if you don't have 20 minutes to meditate, you should meditate for an hour. But I don't want people to think, oh my God, now I have to carve out another hour. Like start with 5 minutes and 10 minutes and build up, right? Like you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
But even this idea of power of the pause, a 60-second technique, and all it is for me is it's 4 rounds of 5 second inhale, holding it, 5 second exhale. And that alone, like when you feel reactive or triggered, that 60-second break can help you stay um, regulated and kind of like in the driver's seat of your life. It came to mind. Here's what I want to ask you. Because I feel like something like this, since there is so much content on YouTube and you could Google meditation and breath work, and I don't want people to be overwhelmed. Where could they start? Like, what is there a practical tool to simply get started?
There's three things that I recommend for any new practitioner coming to the practice. And the first one is take some time and think about why are you being drawn to the practice? Because if, for you, it might be, I want to stay around and watch my grandkids grow up, or I want to stay healthy and mobile as I get older, or maybe it's I'm dealing with these panic attacks or stress disorders or whatever it is, or maybe you're an athlete, you want to improve your performance. Because if you have a strong why, it's going to happen to all of us. The alarm's going to go off tomorrow, next week, next month, and we're going to be, I'm tired. I'll hit the snooze button. I'll do my practice tomorrow. But if you have a strong why and a reason to get up, now that's going to happen a lot less often, and you're going to be a lot more consistent with your practice, which is the second thing I like to talk about. And, really having a daily consistent practice is key with meditation. You got to make it a habit. You got to make it part of your life. And when you do this, you start to develop all of these qualities that feed over into everything you do and your relationships, your business, your hobbies, and basically everything. And so having these two first steps and this understanding of this when you take on the practice is important. And then the third and final thing is, which we've already talked about, is finding a good guide. You really can accomplish a lot in a short amount of time with somebody leading you down the right path, but you can also waste a lot of years of your life if you don't have any focus.
I love those three shares and thank you. And we can use that in so many areas of our life. Having a why, being consistent, and finding that guide or mentor. I love that. Here's what I'd love to know. What are some of your daily rituals and practices since you've been doing this for many decades? And I'm sure you've had different practices throughout those decades, but what are some of your daily rituals?
It the list is long and it changes often. I do things from a sitting practice to standing meditation. I have stretching routines that I do, Tai Chi forms, Qigong sets, different philosophical sayings that I work with, different energetic circulations that I do. I try to find moments throughout the day to continue on top of my morning ritual. So I'm practicing throughout the day and in the evening before I go to bed, different gratitude practices that I work with. And so there's just many different things.
I did not ask this at the beginning, but was there some sort of life event or something that got you into this to begin with?
It's kind of funny how I got started in the meditative arts because I wasn't looking to pick up the practice. And in fact, I was kind of wanting to stay away from it. But I was 19 years old. I was very much into Western boxing. And I'd met this boxing coach who was a very well-known coach and very influential in my life. And after working with him for 2 or 3 weeks, he told me one day something that changed my life forever. And that he said, if you really want to be a good boxer, you should start doing meditation and Tai Chi. At the time, I'm this 19-year-old kid who doesn't know much of anything, thinking, isn't that for old people in the park? How's that going to help me be a better fighter? And
Yeah.
it changed my whole life in so many ways. And through the years, I've seen it change hundreds of other people's lives. And so that's what's really kind of given me the passion to do the practice.
I have joked about this before, but that I call myself a recovering type A. Like I used to be living in, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was living in high stress and burnout, go, 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 because that's all I knew. So, of course, to go from that to sitting in meditation was very uncomfortable to my nervous system because I was so used to being stressed out. But now that I've moved away from the high stress and go, 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 I'm telling you that like I crave it. I love the peace, the presence, like it's a lifestyle, and I've had a total lifestyle change over the years. But um, yeah, I highly recommend it. But you just start somewhere. Start with 5 minutes.
For sure.
Here's what I'd love to ask you. We've touched on quite a bit and you've shared many different frameworks and pillars. What do you believe is a key takeaway you want listeners to get?
We've kind of already mentioned it. I think for those of you, I think the main takeaway is what's your why, develop the consistency, and find yourself a guide. If you do those three things and you do that and you stay with that for at least a year, I guarantee you will do the practice for the rest of your life. You'll see so many benefits from it. It'll be one of the best things you've ever done.
Totally agree. All right, to wrap up the interview, I have a few rapid fire questions for you.
Sure.
What is a quote or motto that you live by?
To try to be considerate and aware in every interaction that I'm in.
On this topic of meditation and I guess I'm going to use the word mindfulness, is there a book you're currently reading or highly recommend?
There is a book, since we touched on this already, called Embryonic Breathing by Dr. Yongjing Ming, which is a great book. If you like the kind of the philosophy and the mindset of kind of how I'm talking about building an evolving life practice, my latest book, The Yielding Warrior, is a great one to check out as well.
Final question. What advice would you give your younger self?
To stay true to your passion and always follow your heart.
Hmm. Great note to end on. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your practice.
Thank you.